The rain had been falling since dawn, a thin, relentless veil that blurred the iron gates of Blackwood Manor and turned the gardens into a wash of gray and green. Inside the house, warmth glowed from polished lamps and roaring fireplaces, but no amount of comfort could soften the tension that lived within its walls. Blackwood Manor had witnessed generations of whispered secrets, strategic marriages, and quiet wars fought with smiles and titles, and tonight it was preparing to witness another. Duchess Eleanor Blackwood stood near the tall, arched window of the east drawing room, her posture flawless, her expression composed to the point of coldness. At 45, she possessed the kind of beauty that did not fade but sharpen with age. Her dark hair was arranged in a precise chignon, not a strand out of place, and her deep blue eyes watched the rain as though it were a chessboard where every drop mattered. She did not move when the door opened behind her. "Your Grace," said a voice, hesitant but respectful. Eleanor turned slowly. "You may speak, Thomas." Thomas Avery, her personal secretary, stepped forward with a thin folder held tightly in his hands. He had served the Duchess for nearly 10 years and had learned that hesitation was dangerous, but haste was worse. "The Duchess of Hawthorne has arrived. She is waiting in the red salon, as you instructed." A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips, but it never reached her eyes. "Excellent. And my daughter?" "Lady Clara is in her rooms. She was informed of the meeting, but she chose not to attend." "Of course she did," Eleanor replied calmly. "She always believes absence will protect her." "It never does." Thomas swallowed. "Shall I announce you?" "Yes," Eleanor said, "and then leave us. What is about to be discussed does not require witnesses." She moved past him, her silk gown whispering against the floor as she walked. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. Eleanor Blackwood did nothing without purpose. The red salon was a room designed to intimidate. Deep crimson walls, heavy velvet curtains, and portraits of stern ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. In the center of the room stood Duchess Margaret Hawthorne, tall and rigid, her gloved hands clasped in front of her like a shield. Her face was pale with controlled fury. The moment Eleanor entered, Margaret turned sharply. "So," she said, her voice tight, "you finally decided to see me." Eleanor gestured toward a pair of chairs near the fireplace. "Please sit. Standing only exhausts the nerves, and we will need ours intact." Margaret did not sit. "Do not patronize me, Eleanor. What your daughter has done is unforgivable." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That depends entirely on one's definition of forgiveness." Margaret's eyes flashed. "Your daughter ruined my son." The words hung in the air like smoke. The crackling fire seemed to grow louder, as if listening. Eleanor smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was sharp, controlled, and terrifyingly calm. "Good," she said softly. Margaret stiffened. "Good." Her voice rose despite herself. "You think this is good? My son's name has been dragged through gossip, his engagement destroyed, his future questioned in every drawing room from here to London. He is humiliated." "Is he?" Eleanor asked, finally taking her seat. "From what I understand, your son made promises he had no intention of keeping. He played at affection, at devotion, and assumed there would be no consequences." Margaret scoffed. "They were young. Such things happen. It did not require your daughter's theatrics." "Clara merely refused to be silent," Eleanor replied. "If that ruined him, perhaps he was already fragile." Margaret took a sharp breath. "You are enjoying this." "I am appreciating it," Eleanor corrected. "There is a difference." For a moment, neither woman spoke. The rain beat harder against the windows, as if mirroring the storm beneath their polished words. "You always did think yourself superior," Margaret said at last. "Even when we were girls." Eleanor's gaze flickered just for an instant. "And you always mistook strategy for cruelty." Margaret stepped closer. "Listen to me carefully. My family will not let this go. My son will not let this go. If you think this ends with a broken engagement, you are mistaken." Eleanor leaned back, her expression serene. "I would be disappointed if it did." Margaret stared at her, disbelief slowly giving way to something like fear. "What are you planning?" Eleanor did not answer immediately. She turned her head slightly, looking toward the closed door that led deeper into the manor. "Do you know why I insisted Clara not be present?" she asked. Margaret frowned. "No, because this conversation is not about her feelings," Eleanor said. "It is about outcomes." Margaret's lips tightened. "You're using your own daughter as a weapon." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "I am protecting her by teaching her the truth of this world. No one protects a woman who refuses to protect herself." The fire snapped loudly, sending a shower of sparks upward. "My son loved her," Margaret said, the words sounding almost desperate. Eleanor laughed softly. "No, your son desired her. There is a difference, and Clara learned it too late. But not too late to act." Margaret shook her head. "You raised her to destroy." "I raised her to survive," Eleanor replied coldly. "If destruction is the byproduct, that is hardly my concern." Silence fell again, thicker than before. "You will pay for this," Margaret said quietly. Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. "We all pay for something, Margaret. Today, it happens to be your son." Margaret's hands trembled, but she straightened her shoulders. "This is not over." Eleanor stood. "No," she agreed. "It is just beginning." Margaret turned and walked toward the door, stopping only once. "Tell your daughter to be careful," she said. "There are consequences she does not yet understand." Eleanor watched her go, her expression unreadable. When the door closed, she remained standing, staring into the fire as though it might answer questions she would never ask aloud. Moments later, a soft knock came from the side door. "Enter," Eleanor said. Clara Blackwood stepped into the room. At 22, she carried a quiet grace that contrasted sharply with her mother's sharp precision. Her eyes were red, though she held her chin high. "She's gone," Clara said. "Yes," Eleanor replied. "And she's very angry." Clara swallowed. "You enjoyed that." Eleanor turned to face her daughter fully. "Enjoyment is irrelevant." "You told her good, didn't you?" Clara asked. Eleanor studied her carefully. "I did." Clara's voice wavered. "How could you say that?" "My life is in ruins." Eleanor stepped closer, her gaze intense. "Your life is beginning." Clara shook her head. "I loved him." "You love the version of him he showed you," Eleanor said. "And now you know better." Clara's hands clenched. "Everyone is whispering about me." "They always whisper," Eleanor replied. "The mistake is caring." Clara looked at her mother, confusion and pain battling in her eyes. "What happens now?" Eleanor placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder, her touch firm, grounding. "Now," she said, "you learn how power truly works. And you learn that breaking a man who thought himself untouchable is sometimes the only way to be free." Clara inhaled shakily. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the world clean of illusions. Inside Blackwood Manor, a far more dangerous storm was only beginning to form. Morning arrived without mercy. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained low and colorless, pressing down on Blackwood Manor like an unspoken judgment. Clara Blackwood stood before the tall mirror in her bedchamber, staring at her own reflection as if it belonged to someone else. Her eyes were shadowed from a sleepless night, her thoughts tangled between shame, anger, and a strange, unwelcome sense of relief. For the first time in months, there was no letter to expect, no carefully chosen words from a man who had promised her a future while secretly negotiating another. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Anna, her maid since childhood, entered carrying a silver tray with tea and toast. She hesitated, studying Clara's face. "Your mother asked if you would join her for breakfast." Clara exhaled slowly. "Tell her I'll be there shortly." Anna nodded, but lingered. "People are already talking," she said quietly. "The staff, I mean." Clara managed a thin smile. "Of course they are." After Anna left, Clara dressed with deliberate care. She chose a simple blue gown, elegant but unremarkable, armor disguised as modesty. When she finally descended the grand staircase, she felt every step echo through the house, as if announcing her presence to unseen judges. The breakfast room was bright with morning light, a deliberate contrast to the heavy red salon of the night before. Duchess Eleanor sat at the head of the table, reading correspondence as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. She looked up when Clara entered. "Sit," Eleanor said calmly. "Eat. Starving yourself will not improve your reputation." Clara sat across from her, hands folded tightly in her lap. "You spoke to Duchess Hawthorne?" "Yes." "And you told her you were glad?" "Yes." Clara looked down. "Everyone will think I'm cruel." Eleanor set her letters aside. "Everyone already thinks something about you. You cannot control that. You can only decide whether it benefits you." Clara's jaw tightened. "It doesn't feel like it benefits me." Eleanor studied her daughter for a long moment. Pain rarely announces its purpose. It simply demands endurance. Clara pushed her plate away untouched. "He wrote to me last night." Eleanor's expression did not change. "And he said I destroyed him," Clara said. "He said he loved me and that I acted out of spite." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "Did he deny his engagement to Miss Fairchild?" "No." "Did he deny promising you marriage?" "No." "Then he is angry because the truth inconvenienced him," Eleanor said coolly. "That is not love." Clara swallowed hard. "What if he truly suffers?" Eleanor leaned forward. "Then he is learning. Men like him rarely do." The carriage wheels were heard outside before Clara could respond. Eleanor rose smoothly. "Finish your tea. We have visitors." Within minutes, the house was alive with controlled movement. Servants whispered, doors opened and closed, and Clara felt the manor shifting into one of its many practice performances. She followed her mother into the main sitting room, where Lord Edmund Fairchild waited. He stood as they entered, his expression polite but strained. "Your Grace." "Lady Clara." Eleanor inclined her head. "Lord Fairchild, to what do we owe the pleasure?" Edmund cleared his throat. "I came regarding my daughter." Clara stiffened. "Miss Fairchild was meant to marry Lord Hawthorne," Edmund continued. "The engagement has been complicated." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I imagine it has." Edmund glanced at Clara, then back to Eleanor. "There are rumors suggesting your daughter played a role in its dissolution." Clara opened her mouth, but Eleanor raised a hand slightly. "Rumors often suggest many things," Eleanor said. "Some are even true." Edmund's face tightened. "My daughter has been humiliated. Her future now uncertain." Eleanor's voice was smooth. "Your daughter was promised to a man who had already promised himself elsewhere." That uncertainty existed long before Clara spoke. Edmund frowned. "You speak as though betrayal is a minor inconvenience." "I speak as someone who understands it intimately," Eleanor replied. "And I assure you, silence would not have saved your daughter. It would only have delayed her pain." Edmund hesitated. "What are you suggesting?" "That this situation can be corrected," Eleanor said. "Not restored, corrected." Clara looked at her mother sharply. "What do you mean?" Eleanor did not look at her. "Lord Hawthorne's reputation is damaged. My daughter's name is the subject of gossip. Your daughter is free of a marriage that would have broken her. There is opportunity in this chaos." Edmund studied her. "Opportunity for whom?" "For families willing to be honest," Eleanor said. "And strategic." Edmund's gaze hardened. "You are proposing alliances already." "I am acknowledging reality," Eleanor replied. "The world does not pause for heartbreak." Edmund rose slowly. "I will consider what you've said." "Do," Eleanor said. "Time favors the decisive." After he left, Clara turned to her mother, disbelief written across her face. "You're negotiating futures as if nothing happened." Eleanor finally met her eyes. "Because something happened, and it cannot be undone." Clara's voice trembled. "You're turning this into leverage." "Yes," Eleanor said simply. Clara shook her head. "What if I don't want leverage? What if I just want peace?" Eleanor's expression softened, but only slightly. "Peace is not given to women like us. It is taken inch by inch." Later that afternoon, Clara escaped to the garden. The hedges were trimmed perfectly, the paths immaculate, yet she felt lost among them. She replayed memories of stolen glances and whispered promises, now tainted by truth. Anger rose beneath her sorrow, sharp and unfamiliar. "You look like someone at war with herself." Clara turned to see Julian Blackwood, her cousin, leaning casually against a stone balustrade. He had arrived that morning, summoned quietly by Eleanor. "Shouldn't you be in London?" Clara asked. Julian smiled faintly. "Your mother thought I might be useful." Clara laughed bitterly. "She always does." Julian studied her. "You exposed him." "Yes." "Good," Julian said. Clara stared. "You sound like her." Julian shrugged. "She's rarely wrong." Clara's hands clenched. "I didn't plan this. I just couldn't lie anymore." Julian nodded. "Then you did the bravest thing possible." She looked at him, surprised. "You don't think I ruined everything?" "I think you revealed it," Julian replied. "There's a difference." For the first time since the scandal broke, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not happiness, but resolve. That evening, Eleanor stood alone in her study, reading a letter sealed with an unfamiliar crest. She broke the seal carefully and read in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she placed the letter on the desk and stared into the fire. "So," she murmured to herself, "he's decided to fight." Upstairs, Clara looked out at the darkening grounds, unaware that forces far beyond her heartbreak were already moving. The game had changed, and whether she wished it or not, she was now a central piece on the board. The letter arrived just before dusk, carried by a rider who did not ask to dismount. He handed it to the butler, waited long enough to ensure it was received, and left without a word. By the time Eleanor Blackwood held the heavy cream envelope in her hands, she already knew who it was from. Some challenges announced themselves long before ink ever touched paper. She read it once, then again, her face calm, her mind razor-sharp. Lord Hawthorne was demanding a public retraction. He claimed his son had been misled, manipulated, emotionally trapped. He threatened legal action, social retaliation, and whispered influence in Parliament. It was a man lashing out because he had lost control. Eleanor folded the letter neatly and placed it on her desk. "Expected," she said to the empty room. A knock followed almost immediately. "Enter," she called. Julian stepped inside, loosening his gloves. "You got two, didn't you?" Eleanor looked up. "So he's casting his net wide." Julian nodded. "He's angry. That makes him sloppy." "Anger always does," Eleanor replied. "Sit." Julian did, watching her carefully. "He's blaming Clara openly now. His supporters are repeating it." Quietly, for the moment. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "Then it's time to stop being quiet." Upstairs, Clara felt the shift before she understood it. The servants' movements became more precise, more urgent. Doors closed softly but firmly. Whispers stopped when she entered rooms. She found her mother waiting for her in the small library, a space Eleanor reserved for lessons rather than comfort. "Sit," Eleanor said. Clara obeyed. "They are coming for you," Eleanor said plainly. Clara's breath caught. "Him, his family, his allies. Society has decided you are a convenient villain." Clara looked down at her hands. "I thought telling the truth would be enough." Eleanor leaned forward. "Truth is never enough on its own. It requires structure, witnesses, timing." Clara's voice was quiet. "What do you want me to do?" Eleanor studied her daughter closely. "I want you to speak. Publicly. Once." Clara looked up sharply. "Publicly, yes. A controlled appearance. One statement. No emotion. No accusations. Only facts." "They'll tear me apart," Clara whispered. "They will try," Eleanor corrected. "And fail." Julian stepped forward. "Your mother has already arranged it. A charity gala. Neutral ground. Press will be present." Clara stood abruptly. "You planned this without asking me." Eleanor rose as well. "Because hesitation is blood in the water." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but her voice did not break. "You're turning my pain into a spectacle." Eleanor's tone softened, but her words did not. "I'm turning your pain into armor." That night, Clara could not sleep. She replayed every memory of him, every smile, every promise, now rearranged under a harsher light. She realized something frightening and empowering at once. She was no longer afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing herself. The gala took place 3 nights later at the Ashbourne Hall, a venue known for hosting causes fashionable enough to distract from politics. Crystal chandeliers glowed above silk and jewels. Conversations hummed with false warmth. And beneath it all, anticipation crackled. Clara arrived on her mother's arm. The room shifted. Eyes turned. Whispers bloomed and died. Some faces held sympathy, others satisfaction. Eleanor guided Clara forward with steady confidence, as if daring anyone to challenge their presence. Lord Hawthorne was already there. He stood near the center of the room, his son at his side. The young man looked thinner, sharper, his arrogance replaced with bitterness. His eyes met Clara's, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or anger that regret came too late. Eleanor did not look at him. When the host called for attention, Clara felt her pulse thunder in her ears. Eleanor squeezed her hand once and let go. Clara stepped forward alone. "I will be brief," she said, her voice carrying clearly. "Because this evening is not about scandal. It is about honesty." The room stilled. "I was promised marriage by a man who was already engaged. I discovered this truth and refused to remain silent. That is the extent of my involvement." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I have not exaggerated. I have not sought revenge. I have only stated facts that can be verified. Any discomfort caused is the result of choices made long before I spoke." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I regret trusting someone who did not respect me. I do not regret refusing to protect a lie." She inclined her head and stepped back. That was all. The effect was immediate and volatile. Conversations exploded. Lines were drawn. Clara felt lightheaded, but she did not falter. Eleanor's gaze met hers from across the room, approving, fierce. Lord Hawthorne moved first. He approached Eleanor, his smile brittle. "Enjoying the show?" Eleanor returned his smile. "Immensely. You've turned this against us," he hissed. "No," Eleanor replied calmly. "You turned it against yourself. We simply removed the curtain." He leaned closer. "This will not end here." Eleanor's eyes were cold. "It never does." Across the room, Julian watched as alliances subtly shifted. Supporters drifted away from the Hawthorns, drawn by the unmistakable scent of vulnerability. Power, he knew, was never about morality. It was about momentum. Later, as the carriage rolled back toward Blackwood Manor, Clara sat in silence. "You did well," Eleanor said finally. Clara looked at her. "I felt strong." Eleanor allowed herself a rare smile. "That feeling is dangerous." Clara frowned. "Why?" "Because once you taste it," Eleanor said, "you will never accept powerlessness again." At the manor, another letter waited. This one was different. Short, sharp, unapologetic. Lord Hawthorne was demanding a private meeting. Eleanor read it, then burned it in the fire. "No," she said softly. "If he wants war, he doesn't get to choose the battlefield." Upstairs, Clara stood at her window, watching the moon rise over the estate. For the first time, she did not feel like a victim of events, but a participant in them. She did not yet know the cost. She would. The morning after the gala dawned clear and sharp, the kind of brightness that made secrets feel exposed. Newspapers arrived in thick bundles, their ink still smelling faintly of metal and haste. Eleanor read them all without expression, marking margins with a pencil, circling names, noting who framed the story as courage and who framed it as scandal. By the time Clara entered the breakfast room, her mother had already mapped the shifting terrain. "They're divided," Clara said quietly, glancing at the spread of papers. "They always are after a clean statement," Eleanor replied. "Division is opportunity." Clara poured tea, her hand steady. He didn't deny it. "No," Eleanor said. "Silence is the loudest admission." A footman appeared at the door. "Your Grace, there's a visitor." Eleanor did not look up. "Who?" "Mr. Nathaniel Cross." Clara stiffened. The name was unfamiliar, but something in the way the footman spoke suggested importance. Eleanor paused, then nodded. "Send him in." Nathaniel Cross entered with the confidence of a man accustomed to rooms changing shape around him. He was not titled, not formally powerful, yet his reputation carried weight in quieter corridors. A fixer, some said. A broker of truths others preferred buried. "Duchess Blackwood," he said, bowing slightly. "Lady Clara." Eleanor gestured to a chair. You're early. I prefer it, Cross replied, sitting. Before positions hardened, Clara watched him carefully. Why are you here? Cross smiled faintly. Because Lord Hawthorne has made inquiries. And because you have leverage he wants neutralized. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. He should know better than to send an intermediary. I didn't come for him, Cross said evenly. I came for balance. Clara frowned. Balance for whom? For you, Cross said, meeting her gaze. And for the city. This could spiral. Eleanor folded her hands. Spirals are not my concern. They should be, Cross replied. Hawthorne is rallying. Not loudly. Selectively. He's painting you as reckless. As manipulators. Clara's jaw tightened. I told the truth. And truth, Cross said, needs reinforcement. Eleanor leaned back. Speak plainly. Cross did not hesitate. There are letters. Not yours. His son's. Promises. Contradictions. Proof. If they surface without control, the fallout will be indiscriminate. Clara's heart pounded. You have them. I know where they are, Cross said. And I know who is willing to sell them. Eleanor's gaze sharpened. At what price? Cross named it. It was not small. Clara looked to her mother. We can't. Eleanor raised a hand. Leave us. Clara hesitated. Mother, please, Eleanor said softly. When Clara left, Eleanor studied Cross. You're not doing this out of charity. No, Cross admitted. I'm doing it to prevent a mess that would inconvenience people who pay me to avoid inconvenience. Eleanor nodded. Acquire them. Quietly. Cross smiled. Already in motion. That afternoon, Clara found Julian in the West Garden, pacing. They sent him, Julian said. Cross. I know, Clara replied. What aren't they telling me? Julian stopped. That this has become bigger than your story. Clara folded her arms. I didn't want a war. Julian's expression softened. Wars don't ask. By evening, whispers had turned to plans. Invitations were withdrawn. New ones appeared. Eleanor moved through it all with precision, never rushing, never reacting. Clara watched and learned, understanding dawning slowly. Power was not loud. It was patient. 2 days later, Lord Hawthorne made his move. The accusation came wrapped in concern. A formal complaint questioning Clara's mental stability, her motivations, her credibility. It was subtle enough to sound reasonable, cruel enough to cut deeply. Clara read it in silence, then looked up. He's calling me unstable. Eleanor nodded. A classic retreat. Clara's voice shook with anger. He's trying to erase me. Eleanor stood. He is trying to redefine you. Julian entered, breathless. Cross has the letters. Eleanor turned sharply. All of them. Enough, Julian said. They're devastating. Clara swallowed. What do we do? Eleanor considered. We wait. Clara stared. Wait. Yes, Eleanor said, because now he expects panic. That night, Clara dreamed of doors closing and opening, of her own voice echoing back at her stronger than before. She woke with resolve hardening into something new. The next morning, Eleanor summoned her. There will be another appearance, Eleanor said. Smaller. Select. Clara met her gaze. I'll do it. Eleanor studied her daughter, then nodded. Good. At the private luncheon, Clara spoke not of romance or betrayal, but of autonomy, of truth, of the cost of silence. The room listened. Some nodded. Some bristled. All remembered. By the end of the week, the letters leaked, not publicly, but precisely. Enough to end denials. Enough to expose patterns. Lord Hawthorne's allies thinned. His son disappeared from view, and Clara felt the ground settle beneath her feet. One evening, Eleanor joined her in the library. You're changing, Eleanor said. Clara closed her book. So are you. Eleanor allowed a small smile. Careful. Clara returned it. I am. Outside, the manor stood quiet, but the city beyond buzzed with recalibration. Lines redrawn. Doors reconsidered. The war had not ended, but the tide had turned. Power never announced its arrival with noise. It crept in through routine, settled into habits, and reshaped expectations before anyone realized resistance was no longer possible. Clara felt it in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room and then resumed with care. She felt it in invitations that once excluded her now arriving with handwritten notes, warm and urgent. The city had decided she was no longer merely a subject of gossip. She was a factor. Eleanor watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. Attention, she told Clara one evening, is only dangerous when you don't know how to direct it. Clara nodded, though part of her still recoiled at how quickly the world had forgiven what it once condemned. They didn't care about the truth, she said. They care about who controls it. Eleanor smiled thinly. Now you understand. The Hawthorne response was slower than Clara expected. No public outrage. No dramatic rebuttal. Instead, a careful withdrawal. Apologies framed as misunderstandings. Rumors redirected towards smaller, safer targets. It was the behavior of a family attempting to survive a wound without revealing how deep it went. Julian brought the first confirmation. They're bleeding quietly, he said, closing the door to Eleanor's study. Assets being shifted, friends distancing themselves. Clara looked up. So it's over? Julian shook his head. It's transforming. That transformation came sooner than expected. A week later, Clara received a letter written in a familiar hand. The sight of his name tightened her chest before she could stop it. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she carried it to Eleanor. Her mother examined the seal. He's desperate, she said. Desperate men write letters. Should I read it? Clara asked. Yes, Eleanor replied. But not alone. They sat opposite each other, the fire low, the room intimate and unforgiving. Clara broke the seal. The letter was an apology in structure, but an accusation in tone. He claimed confusion, pressure, love twisted by fear. He begged for discretion. He hinted at consequences if discretion was denied. It was everything Eleanor had predicted. Clara finished reading and felt strangely calm. He still thinks he has power over me. Because once, Eleanor said, he did. Clara folded the letter carefully. He wants to meet. Eleanor's eyes lifted. And I want to, Clara said. Not for him. For me. Julian reacted sharply. That's a mistake. Maybe, Clara replied. But it's one I need to make. Eleanor considered her daughter for a long moment. Then she nodded. Very well. On our terms. The meeting was arranged in a public conservatory, bright with glass and greenery. No shadows. No privacy. Clara arrived alone, though she knew Julian watched from a distance. He stood when he saw her, uncertainty flickering across his face. Clara. She inclined her head. You wanted to speak. He reached for her hand. She did not offer it. I never meant to hurt you, he said quickly. Things became complicated. They were always complicated, Clara replied. I was simply the only one honest about it. His jaw tightened. You didn't have to destroy me. Clara met his gaze steadily. I didn't destroy you. I refused to disappear. For a moment, he looked genuinely lost. I loved you. No, Clara said softly. You loved how I made you feel safe. Silence stretched between them, thin and brittle. What do you want? He asked. Clara thought of sleepless nights, of fear, of learning how power worked. Nothing, she said. That's the point. She stood and left without looking back. When she returned to the manor, Eleanor was waiting. Well, her mother asked. Clara exhaled. I'm finished. Eleanor nodded, approval clear. Good. Closure is a luxury. You earned it. But peace, Clara would learn, was never absolute. Days later, Nathaniel Cross returned, his expression grave. There's pressure, he said. Not from Hawthorne. From others who fear precedent. Clara frowned. Precedent. A woman who speaks and survives, Cross replied. That unsettles certain structures. Eleanor's eyes hardened. Let them be unsettled. Cross hesitated. They're proposing an alternative narrative. One that praises your resilience while quietly questioning your future usefulness. Clara laughed once, sharp and humorless. So, they want me inspirational, but irrelevant. Precisely, Cross said. Eleanor stood. That will not do. That night, Eleanor laid out the next step. Not as a command, but as an invitation. You could withdraw, she told Clara. Live quietly. Marry well. Be safe. Clara listened, then shook her head. I won't. Eleanor's gaze searched her face. You understand the cost. I do, Clara said, and I'm willing to pay it. A silence passed between them, heavy and unspoken. Then Eleanor smiled. Not sharply, not strategically, but with something like pride. Very well, she said. Then we advance. Outside, the city lights glimmered like a field of possibilities. Clara stood taller, no longer reacting to the game, but shaping it. She did not yet know how far it would go, only that there was no turning back now. The first real consequence arrived disguised as opportunity. An invitation, embossed and impeccably worded, requesting Clara's presence on the advisory board of the Harrington Foundation, a charitable institution with deep ties to political families and cultural gatekeepers. It was exactly the sort of role that appeared progressive while quietly limiting influence. They want to place you somewhere visible but contained, Julian said after reading the letter. A glass box. Clara traced the edge of the card with her finger. And if I accept, they'll praise you, Eleanor replied. Then they'll stop listening. Clara looked up. And if I refuse, they'll call you ungrateful, Eleanor said calmly. And start listening very carefully. Clara smiled faintly. Then I refuse. The response was immediate. Another wave of whispers, sharper this time. Articles that admired her courage now questioned her temperament. Friends advised restraint. Distant relatives suggested rest. The language of concern returned, refined and persistent. They're circling, Julian muttered. Eleanor was unmoved. Let them. What they did not expect was Clara's next move. Instead of retreating, she accepted an invitation to speak at a small university forum. Unfashionable, earnest, and unprotected by society's usual buffers. No grand chandeliers, no controlled guest list. Just students, faculty, and an audience untrained in polite avoidance. Eleanor read the program once. They will ask real questions. That's why I'm going, Clara said. The hall was modest, the lighting unforgiving. Clara stood at the podium without notes. When she spoke, her voice did not tremble. I was told silence was dignity, she said. I learned it was convenience. Not for me, but for others. The room leaned in. She spoke of systems rather than individuals, of how truth was weighed differently depending on who carried it, of how women were praised for resilience only after they stopped demanding change. The response was not immediate applause, but something deeper. Attention, engagement, debate. Within days, excerpts circulated, unpolished, undeniable, not easily dismissed. Nathaniel Cross returned again, this time with less composure. You've shifted the frame, he said. That wasn't expected. Clara met his gaze. Neither was I. Pressure intensified. Donors threatened withdrawals. Allies requested private assurances. Eleanor listened to it all, then made her own call. We're forming something, she told Clara one evening. Not a charity, not a salon, a platform. Clara hesitated. That will provoke them. Yes, Eleanor said. That's the point. The announcement was brief and precise. A new initiative focused on transparency in private institutions. Advisory-led, publicly accountable. Clara named as its founding voice, not its figurehead. The backlash was swift. Lord Hawthorne reemerged, thinner, sharper, no longer pretending civility. Through intermediaries, he accused Eleanor of engineering a vendetta, of exploiting her daughter, of destabilizing delicate balances. Eleanor responded once, in writing. Short, final. You mistook silence for consent. We will not correct that mistake for you. Clara read it and felt something settle into place. Not anger, not triumph. Clarity. The night before the platform's launch, Clara stood alone in the great hall of Blackwood Manor, staring up at portraits of women whose names history had reduced to footnotes. I wish I knew if they were afraid, she said quietly. Eleanor joined her. They were. Then how do they endure? Eleanor considered. By choosing to fear they could live with. The launch itself was chaos, support and condemnation colliding in real time. Attendance exceeded expectations. So did scrutiny. Clara answered questions carefully, refusing spectacle, refusing apology. By the end of the evening, Julian exhaled. You've crossed a line they can't erase. Clara nodded. Neither can I. Later, alone in her room, Clara received a final message from him. Not a plea, not an accusation, just 3 words. I misjudged you. She deleted it without reply. Outside, the manor stood firm against the night. Inside, something irreversible had taken root. This was no longer about a broken engagement or a wounded family. It was about what happened next. The weeks that followed felt unreal, as if time had begun to move according to different rules. Days stretched with meetings, interviews, and carefully worded statements. Nights collapsed into exhausted silence. Clara learned quickly that visibility was not a single moment, but a condition, one that demanded constant awareness. Support arrived from unexpected places. Women wrote letters describing stories they had never spoken aloud. Men wrote too. Some in solidarity, others in defense of daughters they suddenly understood more clearly. Each message carried weight, and Clara read them all, even when they blurred together. They see themselves in you, Julian said one evening, scanning a stack of correspondence. That's powerful. Clara nodded. It's terrifying. Eleanor watched from the doorway. It should be. Influence always is. The platform gained traction beyond the city. Small institutions requested guidance. Journalists began asking questions that were no longer centered on scandal, but on systems. The narrative shifted again, this time without Eleanor's direct intervention. That worried her. Momentum without control was dangerous. The warning came subtly. A quiet dinner invitation from a man whose name never appeared in print, only in footnotes and funding trails. He spoke politely, praised Clara's intelligence, and suggested collaboration. He wants access, Eleanor said afterward. Not alignment. Clara frowned. He sounded reasonable. So do all men who expect obedience later, Eleanor replied. Clara declined the follow-up meeting. 2 days later, an article appeared, carefully sourced, professionally detached, questioning the funding of the platform. No accusations, just uncertainty, enough to invite doubt. They're testing you, Julian said. Clara felt the old fear stir, then fade. Then we answer. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Publicly, yes, Clara said. With numbers. With names. The response was unprecedented. Financials released. Decision processes explained. Advisors listed. Transparency turned from a concept into a weapon. The article died quietly, but something else emerged. A rival initiative announced itself, suspiciously similar in language, better funded, louder. It praised Clara's courage while positioning itself as the more practical alternative. They're trying to replace you, Julian said. Clara smiled without humor. Then they don't understand the point. She refused to attack. Instead, she invited comparison, open debates, joint panels, side-by-side scrutiny. The rival group declined. Support consolidated. Eleanor watched her daughter navigate these currents with growing respect. She had taught Clara survival. Clara was learning leadership. One evening, as they walked the grounds, Eleanor spoke carefully. You don't need me for this anymore. Clara stopped. I still want you. Eleanor studied her face. Want is different from need. Clara smiled. I know. The Hawthorns made one last attempt. A private offer. A settlement. Silence in exchange for security. Clara did not hesitate. No. When asked why, she answered simply. Because peace that requires erasure isn't peace. The offer vanished. So did the family's remaining influence. By autumn, the platform was no longer fragile. It had allies, critics, and a future that could not be quietly redirected. Late one night, Clara stood alone on the balcony. The city lights spread beneath her like a constellation. Julian joined her. You realize you've changed the rules. Clara exhaled. I didn't mean to. Julian smiled. That's usually how it happens. Inside, Eleanor watched from the shadows, pride and unease woven together. She had prepared her daughter for battle. She had not prepared herself for letting go. The story that began with a broken promise had become something else entirely. A question posed to a world accustomed to easy silence. And the world, for once, was being forced to answer.